They thought they could push me down, laugh at me, and move on. I waited. And when the moment came, I took everything they thought they were entitled to. Now they live in fear. Their small birthday dinner I'd planned, quiet, cozy, nothing flashy. I'd spent the whole day in the kitchen, onions sizzling, spices blooming, the table set so that the candles would look deliberate and not desperate. I even treated myself to something new to wear, a cream blouse that caught the light in a flattering way and a deep green skirt that made me stand up a little straighter when I walked into the room. I wanted this to feel like something gentle and intentional. A little celebration for me, that's all. Sophie showed up with that teenaged air of bored entitlement, phone in hand, headphone cord tucked like armor. She'd been half present the whole meal, scrolling, tapping, smirking at things only she found funny. I barely noticed her until the glass hit me. 1 second my elbow was resting against the table and the next there was a cold splash across my chest. The punch soaked through fabric, warm sweat, and a sharp, embarrassed heat rose to my face. I looked up, and Sophie was standing there, empty cup dangling from limp fingers, looking me in the eye like she'd practiced the moment in a mirror. "Now you look as cheap as you really are," she said, loud, clear, and with that small smile that pretended it was a joke. The room folded into a weird silence. Not the shocked, "Oh my God" silence, but the one where everyone freezes, waiting to see which adult will step in and clean up the mess. I looked for that adult. I looked for Claire, for my mom. Claire kept chewing like she'd swallowed a fly. My mom shrugged and, with the kind of discounting softness that still stung, said, "Oh honey, it's just a prank. Don't make a scene." So I did what I always did when they minimized me. I smiled, I excused myself, and I wiped punch from my blouse with the professionalism of someone who'd been taught dignity as a reflex. But the smile was paper thin. The part of me that planned, that counted and waited, had already started turning over possibilities. I could have yelled. I could have flung a glass. I could have ruined the evening with a theatrical meltdown that every person in that room would have enjoyed as a form of entertainment. Instead I left the obvious performance to them. My revenge, such as it was, would be quieter. It would be precise. It would be the kind of slow, deliberate annoyance that seeps under people's skin and sits there. Later that night, after hugs that felt automatic and the polite, "Thanks for coming," I locked the door behind them and poured a glass of wine. Claire had once asked me to order something for her while she was traveling. She'd given me her card details over the phone and I'd saved them to make the checkout easier. Life had been busy and she'd never changed the card. It was still active in an account I could reach. The cancellation was almost anticlimactic. A few clicks, a typed reason, and the line of credit that made Sophie's shopping trips possible vanished. Not frozen, not paused, terminated. Small, administrative, invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention. Step 1. Step 2 was the one that tasted sweeter in my mouth. Everyone assumed Sophie's shiny little car belonged to her. It didn't. My name was on the title. I'd bought it for her when Claire's finances were a mess, and we'd agreed she'd pay me back. She never did. I'd let it go, until tonight. I slid the keys into my bag and slept like a person who'd finally finished a long, careful piece of work. Early the next morning I made coffee and checked the driveway from my kitchen window. At 8:40, Sophie appeared, hoodie, messy bun, the kind of stride that says the world is a revolving door to her convenience. She stopped at the curb, looked left, looked right, fumbled through her bag for keys. Panic is not dramatic from the inside, it's just a small, rising pressure that makes people speak too fast and move too sharply. She had both. When Claire screeched into the drive 5 minutes later and they both sped off, I stayed put. I imagined them walking into the police station, Sophie insisting, "It was stolen," Claire insisting, "This neighborhood is getting worse." I pictured the officer doing the polite formality of taking a report, then filing it away in that drawer where most small tragedies go. I wasn't kidding anyone when I acted sympathetic over the phone. I made the right noises, the little assurances people crave. "I hope it turns up, that's awful." But inside, I felt a calm detachment that was almost delicious. The car was safe, tucked into Mark's locked garage across town, smelling faintly of Sophie's perfume and the last drive she'd taken with a smug playlist on the stereo. The first day changed everything. Claire's initial fluster tightened into a harder thing, anger. The missing car plus the cancelled card turned minor inconveniences into a full-blown logistical crisis. Sophie couldn't go to the lunch she'd bragged about, she missed shifts, and Claire, suddenly aware that she'd relied on conveniences she hadn't bothered to secure, started to panic. I loved the slow coagulation of it, confusion into worry, worry into suspicion. They started pointing fingers, not at me, obviously. Families have a way of circling the wagons and then stabbing at one another with the same hands. Claire's calls to me changed tone, first frantic, then sharp, then oddly cautious. She asked casual questions that weren't casual at all. "Have you seen anyone hanging around the block? Did your security camera pick anything up?" She was testing me, fishing. Then came the accidental text, the one that made me smile in a private, small way. Claire meant to send, "If I find out you're hiding something about the car, I'm not bailing you out," to Sophie. But she sent it to the wrong number. I didn't reply. I let the message sit there like an unanswered bell. She'd notice. She'd think. She'd worry that I could have seen it. That tiny seed of doubt was planted without me having to do anything else. People started to crack. Neighbors peered over fences. Voices that used to be low and controlled rose to the pitch of someone hauling up years of frustration. Sophie accused Claire of never trusting her. Claire accused Sophie of entitlement and carelessness. It wasn't really about the car anymore, it was about everything the car represented, assumptions, unpaid debts, a pattern of being taken for granted. Grocery shopping that afternoon felt like theater. I nearly bumped into Sophie in the cereal aisle. She and her friends froze when our eyes met, that split-second recognition that someone has been humiliated and decided to look away. I walked on like I didn't notice. I let her watch me pass, and her face fell in a way that was almost deliciously private. By day 3, things at their house were fraying openly. Claire called me in the middle of the day, trying to keep her voice casual while muffled shouting swirled in the background. "Maybe you could swing by if you see anything?" she asked. I promised, of course I would, and then did nothing of the sort. Why would I? The car was safe, untouched. The point wasn't to hurt the vehicle, it was to remove their unquestioned sense of entitlement. Every time I checked on it at Mark's, it looked exactly as she'd left it, full tank, spotless interior, a faint smudge of lip gloss on the visor. The only thing different was that Sophie couldn't use it. That absence did the work I'd been aiming for. The missing thing was more powerful than any dramatic confrontation I could stage. It made them grasp for control and come up empty-handed. People's defenses collapsed in predictable ways. Claire's tired resentments turned into accusations. Sophie's petulance curdled into fury. A neighbor told me how Sophie had screamed at Claire so loudly neighbors came out to watch, how doors slammed, voices echoed. This was no longer a missing car, it was an ember that had ignited a pile of old kindling. I could have returned the keys then. I could have driven the car back, pulled into their driveway, and rung the bell with an "Oh hey, found this." That would have been too neat, too obvious. Instead I waited. I wanted to watch the doubt spread until it looked like something they might carry for a while. On the 7th morning I decided the lesson was complete. I drove the car back, but not to where they would expect. I parked it 2 streets away in front of an empty rental, tucked the keys under the driver's seat, and walked away without looking back. A small, anonymous gift. 2 hours later Claire texted me breathless, "Car found. No damage. Police don't know who had it." Then another, weirdest week ever. Sophie's Instagram went up not long after, her, sitting on the hood, grin wide, caption, "Guess who's back?" No apology. No acknowledgement. Just business as usual. But I knew better. They'd felt the loss. The hole had been carved out and then quietly filled again, leaving a scar. The thing that thrilled me most wasn't the inconvenience or the panic, it was the way suspicion started to stick to them like damp clothing. The next time Sophie snapped her mouth off or Claire made light of something I did, they would hesitate. That little pause, the moment you second-guess yourself before you speak, that was the trophy. I never said a word. I never admitted anything, and the fact that they still don't suspect me is, frankly, the sweetest part. Quiet revenge leaves no bruises you can point to. It only leaves the ache of not knowing, the small, gnawing suspicion that anyone could be the one holding the keys. Tonight, I slid the keys back into the drawer where I keep them, beside the spare batteries and the little stack of receipts I never throw away. I closed the drawer slowly, the sound muffled and final, and for a second, just a second, I wondered what would happen the next time one of them looked at me in that family way and thought, could she be the one? Would they hesitate? Would someone else catch my eye and look away first? There's a knock at the door now, 3 sharp raps, impatient and familiar. My heart does something tiny and human. I breathe in, listen, and then, without answering, I wait to see who steps into the gap they've made. I froze at the sound of those knocks, 3 quick raps, sharp and deliberate, echoing through the stillness of my house. For a heartbeat, I didn't even breathe. My hand hovered over the counter where my half-finished glass of wine sat, and every creak of the wood seemed louder than it should have been. I didn't move toward the door. Not yet. Instead, I stood perfectly still, waiting. Whoever it was didn't knock again. They just lingered. I could feel it, that strange heaviness of someone on the other side of a thin barrier. A dozen thoughts raced through me. Was it Claire? Did she finally let her suspicion grow too big to ignore? Was Sophie here, ready to spew whatever wild story she'd cooked up to justify her embarrassment? Or worse, had someone seen me moving the car? I gripped the counter, my nails pressing into the wood. Seconds stretched out. Then came the faintest sound, footsteps. Slow, dragging. They retreated down the steps, gravel crunching under shoes, until silence filled the space again. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My pulse still thundered, but part of me smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, the game had only begun. And if they were knocking at my door now, what would they do when the next little piece slipped from their hands? 3 weeks slid by and, for the most part, life settled into a rhythm that pretended nothing had happened. I'd still catch sight of Sophie's car now and then, a flash of chrome at the intersection, a smug bumper sticker rolling past, and every time it passed I felt that private little pulse of satisfaction, like a secret joke only I knew the punchline to. The frantic calls from Claire slowed to a trickle. Mom stopped calling with the thinly veiled questions about who might be responsible. From the outside, everything looked patched up, like a picture glued back together, neat, familiar, reassuring. Then one Saturday morning, while the coffee pot was burbling and the house smelled like roasted beans and lemon cleaner, my phone lit up with Claire's name. I nearly let it go to voicemail. I wasn't in the mood for barbed small talk or passive-aggressive politeness, but curiosity nudged me. I answered. "We're coming by. Be home," she said. No please. No explanation. Just the old, bossy shorthand she used when she wanted something done her way. Something about the way she said it, though, softer than usual, a little tentative, made me say yes. Maybe I was bored. Maybe I wanted to see what shape their version of apology would take. Maybe, I'll admit it, I liked the idea of being the center of attention for once, even if it was for apologies. An hour later they pulled into my driveway. They climbed out together, moving the way people do when they've rehearsed an emotion and now they're trying to feel it for real. Sophie wasn't glued to her phone this time. Her shoulders were hunched, hands buried deep in her hoodie sleeves, eyes fixed mostly on the concrete at her feet. Claire's posture was careful, not the confident tilt I'd seen 100 times, but tentative, like she was walking on a frozen pond and hoping nothing would break. Sophie came to the door first. She held a small bouquet, plain, fresh flowers, the kind you pick up on the way to say you're sorry and hope petals will do the talking. She pressed them into my hands, fingers still a little cold from the morning air. She didn't speak at first. Then, quietly, she said, "They're just because." Her voice was small, the words almost swallowed. Claire set a medium-sized gift bag on my dining table with more ceremony than I expected, gold paper, a ribbon tied the way my grandmother used to tie things, like wrapping was itself an apology. "Open it," she said. Inside was the exact leather tote I'd paused to admire in a shop window months earlier. I hadn't mentioned it. I hadn't complained about it. How did she even remember? For a beat I felt that old, disorienting mix of embarrassment and gratitude. It was a nice bag. It was thoughtful. It was also a reminder that they could, when they wanted, notice me. Then the apologies arrived, straight, unvarnished, not the kind that lets people off with, "I'm sorry you felt that way." Claire owned it. She said she'd been wrong to shrug off Sophie's comment as a joke, that she should have defended me, and that she regretted letting me stand there in front of everyone with punch staining my blouse. Sophie didn't hide behind sarcasm, either. She said what she'd said was cruel. She admitted she'd been thinking about it since that night, that losing the car, even without knowing how, had stripped away something she'd taken for granted and made her see that comfort can disappear in a blink. Part of me wanted to believe them right away. I found myself wanting it to be true, wanting the easy fix that lets you fold the hurt up and tuck it away. For a moment, forgiveness felt lighter than carrying the anger around like a stone in my bag. So I accepted the flowers. I opened the bag and ran my fingers along the smooth leather of the tote. I thanked them. I said it meant a lot. I meant it too, in that fragile, immediate way where relief tastes like sugar. But I didn't forget how memory works in my family. I've lived through so many tiny erasures, jokes that cut, then get laughed off, moments where my feelings were trimmed down until they fit someone else's narrative. People can change. They can also perform change. I kept one sock of my armor on, not the heavy, battle-ready kind, but a small, sensible guard against being surprised again. We sat for a while, talking about nothing much. Claire tried to fill the air with housekeeping details, a new job project, how the garden's coming along, the normal things people use to refill awkward silences. Sophie mumbled and kept polishing a story I wasn't invited into. Mom called later that day, sweet and clipped, asking if everything had been okay. I lied with the soft truth, yes, we talked. It was good. She sounded pleased, relieved. Maybe she meant it. Maybe she'd accepted the apology too. At night I arranged the flowers in a vase and set them on the windowsill where the light would catch them. I carried the tote to the closet and placed it on the shelf with a small, private smile and a more guarded thought beneath it. Everything is easier when you don't have to hold the hurt. And yet, underneath the tidy scene, another feeling hummed, quieter, a slow satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with reset. I'd given them a lesson without spectacle. I'd shown them, softly, efficiently, that things can be taken away and returned on someone else's terms. It wasn't malicious, it was corrective. A lesson in boundaries, served cold. Maybe this is a turning point, I told myself that night as I washed the dinner plates. Maybe they've learned. I wanted to be generous with the possibility. I wanted to allow change, to let the family breathe and mend. But I also tucked a small promise into the back of my mind, the kind you make to yourself and say out loud only in small, private ways. I'd let it go for now, but trust would take time. If the old patterns started creeping back, the dismissals, the jokes, the little cuts that add up, I wasn't above reminding them again. And I knew exactly how to do it. As I turned off the kitchen light, the tote sat on the shelf like a tiny flag, proof of olive branches extended and, simultaneously, proof that the drawer where the spare keys lived was still, very much, under my control. If they ever decided to test that line again, well, some lessons are easier to learn the second time around. For now, I set the flowers on the table, smiled when Sophie texted a heart emoji later that night, and slept with one eye a fraction more open.